My cousin Hugo had come out of a concentration camp. It was a shock to see him because he was bald. And if you look at the photographs, he was such a beautiful fella. And anyway, he'd come out, so he appeared in all his baldness and took us with him to live with his mother, Tante Hertha, in Erdnerstraße in Berlin. And of course, it was terribly upsetting, everything. But of course, I wasn't upset because I was a rough little boy of 10. So, whereas everybody cried and this, that, and the other, I didn't. Perhaps I was too stupid. Anyway, there we were living with my Auntie Hertha in Erdnerstraße. And my parents were away in Fuhlsbüttel. And that is how we became an emergency case.
Did you get to see your parents in the prison?
No. Neither my sister nor I saw our parents before we left. They had to sign permission for us to leave the country. Once we were an emergency case, we were, in the eyes of the Jewish community, we were considered an emergency case. And I suppose we were put on a list. But before all this happened, my mother had already been in contact with a lady who used to sell nightshirts to my father. She had a sister in Northern Ireland who had married a gentleman from Northern Ireland. These were two Turkish ladies. The lady was called Fräulein Perlmann, or Frau Perlmann, I don't know whether she was married or not, and her sister was called Mrs. Wolfe, and Mrs. Wolfe lived in Northern Ireland. So we had a connection to the outside world in Northern Ireland. So with the two things that we were an emergency set of children without parents, and the fact that we knew somebody in England, we ended up on one of the Kindertransports and were taken to, were eventually put on one of the transports. But I think a week later, we might have gone to Australia. That was the situation, you know, people were sent out of Berlin, children were sent out of Berlin. So there was a whole group of us on the train of children. But before we got on the train, we had to have all our papers. And I remember going around a big hall in which German officials were sitting. And I could hear at some other table people being shouted and screamed up, you know. They treated us like dirt, really. I know you'd say, you know, somebody treats you like dirt, but I mean, that was really, it didn't matter whether you were a child or not or anything. They just, it was as if we were real rubbish, you know. In other words, what happened afterwards in Germany was already there. In all the Germans that I was in contact with, all the Germans treated us like absolute dirt. And I didn't know at the time that actually they were making money out of it.
How were they doing that?
Well, they bought the furniture for next to nothing. They bought, you were forced to sell your house for next to nothing. My grandparents' house in Dessau, they had to sell it in 1938. And not even now have we got the reparations for it. It's only this year that the German court has recognized us, my sister, myself, and cousin, as the true inheritors of that house. This house was sold to a Nazi for next to nothing. And arrived in England on the 21st of June.
Can you tell me about that arrival, what you remember about arriving in England?
Well, first of all, the boat, we were all, we were sleeping on the boat. And all sorts of children, little ones, smaller than me, older ones than me. And we arrived in England, and I don't know whether it was in Harwich. Well, we arrived in Harwich, but I don't know whether it was in then we were taken to a hall, I suppose by bus. And I don't know whether the hall was in London or whether it was in Harwich, but again, we were made to sit down, and I remember it was a sports hall, because it had boxing implements with them, and I was familiar with boxing implements. And we sat down, and the names were called out. And some people went there, and some people went with those people, and some, the worst part was when brothers and sisters were separated, and there was a lot of screaming. But we were used to screaming, or the whole of bloody Germany was screaming all the time. And so there was, and my sister and I went together to this person who was a representative of the Jewish Refugee Committee from Belfast. And they gave us something to eat, and they put us on the train for Belfast. And that's how we got the following day to Belfast. My sister and I went to Belfast, and my sister had imagined we're going to a rich family in England, It was all, she was a great reader. She was 4 years older than I was, and she was a great reader, and she thought we were going to go to a rich family in England. So actually we went to a home, a refugee home, which the Refugee Committee in Belfast had set up. Not all people went to a home, others went to families. I mean, one of my friends who later on was on the farm actually was living with that family who transferred us from London onto the train. He was living there already. He was from the Czechoslovakia, from Brno, Felix Süßmann.
But you had a connection in Belfast already.
Yes, it was this Mrs. Perlman who used to sell my father nightshirts. Yeah. And she'd gone there to be with her sister, not to be with her sister. She'd gone there because of the Nazis.
So you didn't go to her home?
Oh, no. But she went, you see, the Jewish Refugee Committee in Belfast took mainly Jews from Austria. There was some connection with the Jewish people in Belfast and the Jewish people in Vienna. They had some relationship of some kind. And so they took people from Vienna, Österreich, Wien. And for us coming from Berlin, it was unusual. And this Mrs. Wolf had gone to Mr. Hurwitz, who was head of the Belfast Jewish community, who gave us, he didn't actually give the money, but he guaranteed the £100 per person. And so they took us because we were an emergency case.
But you didn't go to stay with Mrs. Wolf?
No, but we visited her.
Right.
We visited her, Banbridge, in Northern Ireland. That's where she lived. She had a little shop there. And so we ended up in this refugee home in Belfast, in which there were children who went to school and more grown-up people who went out to job if they could get it, and mostly from Vienna. So what I remember about the home in Belfast was that I got there and was immediately surrounded by kids from Vienna and immediately started fighting with them. as I was a Jäcker, I was a German from Berlin, because our accents were different. And naturally my sister was very upset, but I didn't know to be upset. And it was June 1939, and the Belfast Jewish Refugee Committee decided to send the children out to their Bachat farm. They had founded a farm in Milan, Northern Ireland, in order to train boys and girls for agricultural work to go on Hachshara, which is the Hachshara. Anyway, to go to Palestine. And so they had this training farm there, full of boys and girls between 17 and 30. It so happened they were all from Germany and Austria. They were all from Germany.